Did the jury find the defendant, Taylor Schabusiness, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information? Question 1. At the time the crimes were committed, did the defendant have a mental disease or mental defect? Answer, no.
2 sets of openings, closings, deliberations, and verdicts. But that's not all that set the case of Taylor Schabusiness apart from the rest.
I felt bad because I'm like, damn, he's going to be the reason after this. I'm like, might as well just kill it.
It's a gruesome case with almost unbelievable details. A 25-year-old Wisconsin woman convicted of murdering, dismembering, and sexually assaulting her lover.
Well, you're going to have fun trying to look for all the organs, but yeah, they're all dismembered. Yeah, all those movies.
And you also said that you enjoyed it, right? And I enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We're taking a closer look at the bizarre case, from the moment the victim's remains were discovered to the defendant's confession and the jury's double verdicts.
Lifted the towel off, and there was, in fact, a human severed head in the bucket.
Ms. Schabusiness had blood on her hands when she was arrested. So
you got blood on your hands here, on your hands.
Where we have complete decapitation. In other words, it's going completely through the neck, and the head is separate from the remainder of the body.
The story begins in Green Bay, Wisconsin on February 22, 2022, when investigators say Schabusiness knowingly killed her lover, 24-year-old Shad Thyrion, in his mother's basement. After her arrest, Schabusiness explained what started as kinky sex quickly escalated to something more severe.
I was strangling.
You were strangling him.
I was having fun with that.
After strangling Thyrion to death, Schabusiness dismembered his body and sexually assaulted his remains.
That she played with his penis?
Yeah.
After he was dead?
Oh, yeah.
What did you do with the head?
The head, I put it in that bucket, that black bucket.
Black bucket?
With the blanket on top.
Okay.
I should have it.
And then where'd you leave it?
Leave the head? It's still in the bucket. It's right by the stairs.
Thyrion's mother found her son's head in the early morning hours of February 23rd.
Very positive my son's head is in a bucket. I know.
When investigators arrived on the scene, they found something out of a horror movie.
I know you're busy over there, but this is actually what it's going to be. It's not going to be a 961 thing or a 96 thing, so we're going to need more units here.
Prosecutors laid this out in their first set of opening statements, calling the scene a nightmare that Schabusiness purposely created.
So this case is really not a whodunit. You'll hear about the crimes that clearly occurred. You'll hear the defendant's statement saying, yep, I did it. And you have DNA evidence and other investigative tools that kind of corroborate everything else. You'll hear the defendant describe that what apparently begins as a somewhat sexual encounter escalates to a dog collar being placed around Shad's neck. And the defendant quite vividly describes what she then did. She's yanking on the chain. She's describing what's happening to Shad. It's evidence that you'll hear, and you'll hear it from the defendant's own mouth, that shows that this is an intentional act. It's not one pull of a gun trigger. It's an intense act. You'll hear about that from Vincent Tranquita, Dr. Tranquita as well. She's pulling harder, just hoping that he eventually passes, and it takes a significant amount of time. It takes several minutes. So you'll hear her say. After that, after Shad's deceased, she describes what she then does with his body, again, engaging in sexual acts, ultimately dismembering him quite significantly. She reports that afterwards, that law enforcement would have fun finding all the body parts that are located throughout the basement, told law enforcement where to find certain body parts. Like I said, it wasn't obvious to law enforcement who initially respond to that basement what happened.
Schabusiness's defense attorney, Christopher Freilich, countered, saying there's 2 sides to every story.
Now, in this case, the state of Wisconsin, through the Brown County District Attorney's Office, has the complete burden of proof. The state must prove to all of you jurors, beyond a reasonable doubt, each and every element of the crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The United States Constitution presumes that every person who is accused of a crime is presumed to be innocent. And in this case, Taylor Schabusiness is presumed to be innocent. She doesn't have to prove anything. The defense does not have to prove anything in this case. When you're considering all of the evidence, don't jump to conclusions. Don't rush to judgment. Please keep an open mind. Listen to all the facts. Listen to what every witness has to say carefully and weigh what they have to say. And remember, there's always two sides to every story. You jurors are going to have to decipher the facts of what may have occurred or what didn't occur. But at the end of the case, we ask that you find our client not guilty on all the counts. Thank you.
To start, jurors heard the 911 call Thyrion's mother and her boyfriend made after discovering the dismembered head.
Are you positive my son's head is in a bucket, a round bucket in my basement?
What makes you think that?
Because I looked in the bucket.
What did you see?
Exactly what I told you.
Okay, where's the rest of the body at?
No idea.
Okay.
You kind of came upon the bucket, happenstance kind of, right?
Right.
So then you took the towel off?
I did.
And how long did you look in the bucket?
See,
Seconds?
I don't know. Seconds, probably.
Okay, did you put the towel back then?
And I put the towel back, yes.
Tara had woken me up and said she thinks she found Shad, her son's, that's how she put it, I found my son's head in a bucket. So I'm dumbfounded. Didn't believe her. Thought she was having a mental issue or something. Went downstairs and see what the hell she's talking about, and I can't see anything, so we go back upstairs and contemplate what the heck to do.
So I guess what do you do specifically when you go downstairs?
I went to the basement and observed a bucket that she said, but I don't know, my mind blocked it out. About all I seen was like hair, like an animal or something. I didn't know what the heck.
When investigators arrived, they found his head and penis in a bucket, along with Thyrion's other body parts in multiple bags and totes.
Look like there's a bucket with a towel on it?
Just keep that. Dude, it is.
But missing from inside the home were some of Thyrion's limbs. Investigators would later recover them on the other side of the city inside a crock-pot box. Body camera video shows Green Bay police officers first see the box when taking Schabusiness into custody. They also note her hands were covered in blood.
Hi, Taylor. How's it going? Officer Russell with the Green Bay Police Department. Just make sure you ain't got nothing on you here. With Taylor. Contact with Taylor. Taylor, you have one warrant for your arrest. Just put your hands behind your back, quick. Anybody else in your apartment? You got blood on your hands here.
Schabusiness was then taken to the Green Bay Police Department for several interviews. Jurors were shown multiple videos of the first conversation detectives had with her after her arrest.
I hate this outfit. Never in my life.
They found part of Shad at his house, his mom's house. Found his head. Where's the rest of his body?
It's there, inside his house.
It is in the house?
It's inside his house.
Okay. Can you tell me what happened?
It's a good question, because I blacked out during that time.
Schabusiness then described in detail what led up to Thyrion's death. She admitted to smoking meth prior to the incident and referenced both blacking out and tripping. She did recall, however, that she strangled Thyrion to death with a dog collar.
You get it.
He likes it.
Alright.
I was gonna walk him like a dog.
And he wanted that?
I have no idea. What I was gonna do it anyway.
Okay. And you claim it was his idea? With the chain?
Obviously mine. No, it was his idea. It was all him.
Right, so you're on the bed, the chain goes around his neck and you start choking him. And you just realized that he was going to die or what?
I'm just like, I think I went a little too far because I was blacking out while I was doing it, right? And then and then I look at him, I'm like, shit, he's already purple. I'm like, fuck, I'm like, I don't know if he's fucking, is he good? But then when I woke up, during the blackout moment, I'm like, shit. He was coughing up blood. I'm like, I don't know, I just kept on going. Sad. Sorry.
You made the comment, you said that when you were choking, you was coughing up blood, you kind of were like, well, I'm going this far, I'm just going to keep going. Did you realize that by continuing that may kill him?
Oh, yeah, because I felt bad because I'm like, damn, he's going to be losing after this. I'm like, might as well just kill it.
After that, Schabusiness says she both sexually assaulted Thyrion's dead body and dismembered it.
So he dies, he's dead. And then you just kept playing with his body? Okay. And when did you decide to, how long did you play with his body, you think? Is that when you thought it was looked outside and it might have been light out too?
I don't know, it's still dark.
Still dark?
Yeah. Oh, it's gotta be two, 3 hours. I just played with him
You said play with him, what do you mean?
Play with his dick.
Okay.
I put him up over the bed, and then sucked with it.
Okay. But when did you start, cutting up his body?
I don't know, almost right away. I was sucking and cutting at the same time.
She also described cutting up the body using knives from the kitchen.
How did you dismember his body then?
Knives.
With what?
Knives.
Knives? Just more than one knife?
About 4.
Where'd you get those from?
Kitchen. So I couldn't find mine and I wasn't sharp enough.
You weren't sharp?
No. It was alright. Bread knife works good.
Bread knife?
A bread knife works good, yeah.
Really?
I had to use what I used, so yeah. I got lazy last night, so.
The medical examiner later confirmed much of Schabusiness's testimony, saying Thyrion's injuries were consistent with strangulation.
Doctor, you mentioned that you were present on scene and had the opportunity to observe 2 metal dog chains that were collected by law enforcement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you note any consistency between those chains that were collected and the marks that you observed on Shad Thyrion's body?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
When I'm observing injuries or trying to interpret injuries, I am looking for patterns. Anything that I can use to convey to an investigator, hey, you may want to look for this at the scene. In this case, we had very organized, repeating, interrupted indentations on the surface of the tongue, very evenly spaced apart. This would not be inconsistent with the pattern of a chain and the chain links as they twist, leaving separate corner impressions on the surface of the tongue. This is a great deal of force. We're not talking about simply injuries to the superficial structures, for example, the skin. I have injuries to the very thick muscles on the sides of the neck. I have injuries to the soft tissues beneath this. I have injuries to all the soft tissues surrounding the neck, and I also have hemorrhage on the soft tissue on the anterior aspect of the cervical spine. This is hemorrhage deep through multiple layers of the neck, consistent with a great deal of force being applied and a great deal of injury.
Dr. Vincent Tranquita also described the dismemberment, saying Thyrion's body was essentially bloodless and that Schabusiness unfleshed it.
And I believe that this is post-mortem mutilation because there is no hemorrhage associated with these injuries. In other words, I have multiple sharp force trauma with multiple stab wounds, multiple punctures, multiple incised wounds of the skin, deep cuts within the muscles and tendons and soft tissue, deep cuts within the bone, but all of these cuts are non-hemorrhagic. In other words, there's no blood or bleeding associated with it. These are consistent with post-mortem mutilation. In other words, there's no circulation going on.
Early on, many drew parallels between Schabusiness and Jeffrey Dahmer, saying hers may be the most gruesome case in the state of Wisconsin's history since the prolific killer was tried back in 1992. Prosecutors also brought up Dahmer and Schabusiness's interest in the murderer.
I was looking for search history on the internet. I was looking for photographs. I was looking for phone calls, text messages, messaging application chats, things of that nature.
Did you notice anything of evidentiary value?
There was some search history that I found interesting, like internet searches that I found interesting, yes.
And what was that?
Things such as flaming pentagram, Jeffrey Dahmer, things like that. KKK, I believe, is one of them.
And Detective, did you note the dates and times of the respective searches that you believed were relevant?
It was around the time of the homicide.
Throughout this all, the defense clung to one piece of evidence on their side: inconclusive DNA recovered on the sex toy Schabusiness admitted to using on Thyrion's remains.
As to the testing and swabbing of the dildo item J1, are you saying that you could not confirm whether or not Shad Thyrion's DNA is on that item? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. He had an uninformative conclusion for the autosomal results and an inconclusive conclusion for the YSDR results.
After 3 days of testimony, both sides rested. The defense declined to call any witnesses, and Schabusiness waived her right to testify.
My understanding from listening to Mr. Freilich is that you've decided that you would like to exercise your right not to testify. Is that correct?
That is.
Okay. Now, I know you've spoken with your attorney. Do you feel you need any more time to talk to your attorney about that decision?
No, I do not.
Both sides then presented the first round of closing arguments.
Right? This isn't an accident. If it's an accident, you're not going forward. You're not seeing this result and keep pulling. You're calling for help. You're stopping. You're certainly not after the fact, after you finally finish, then cutting up his body, right? You have all the evidence in this case points to intent, right? You have her acts after the fact, like I said. You know, if this was an accident, something happens, right? You call for help, and you have the exact opposite. You have the defendant cutting him up and cleaning up, getting rid of the remains, pouring it down the shower. We heard a lot of testimony about that. Kind of wiping up with the Clorox wipes, which the defendant is acknowledging as well. So you have the defendant's statement in the case, and it lines up with everything else in the case, right? Even little facts that she's remembering and telling you about, right?
I'd like to share with you that I believe this case is a puzzling, unclear, confusing, and bizarre set of facts. It is unknown what really happened between February 22nd of 2022 and February 23rd of 2022. What we do know in this case is that numerous law enforcement officers testified. We had detectives, we had police officers, we had Dr. Kita, and DNA experts, forensic specialists, lots of different people, some citizen witnesses. I'd ask that you consider setting aside your emotions and decide this case based on the facts that are presented. But what I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that there really are no eyewitnesses as to what really happened down in the basement. There is no Taylor Schabusiness there, no other people there. And so that'll be something that you'll have to consider and think about.
After only 45 minutes of deliberations, jurors returned 3 verdicts.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information, dated this date, July 26, 2023, signed by the foreperson. The second verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, guilty of mutilating a corpse as charged in count 2 of the information, dated this date, July 26, 2023, signed by the foreperson. The next verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, guilty of third-degree sexual assault as charged in count 3 of the information, dated this date, 26th day of July, 2023, signed by the foreperson.
Just hours later, jurors returned to the Brown County Courthouse for the second half of the case.
The defendant has been found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. We will now proceed with the second phase of this trial. During the second phase, you will be asked to determine whether the defendant is not responsible by reason of mental disease or defect. Before you may find the defendant is not responsible for the criminal conduct, the defendant must satisfy you to a reasonable certainty by the greater weight of the credible evidence that at the time the crime was committed, the defendant had a mental disease or defect and as a result lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct or to conform that conduct to the requirements of the law.
For the defense's second opening, Freilich echoed Judge Thomas Walsh's instructions.
The burden does shift to the defense in this particular case. We're in phase 2 now, and the burden shifts to the defense, to me, to ask you to consider whether the defendant, Taylor Denise Schabusiness, is responsible or is not responsible by reason of mental disease or defect. And Wisconsin law, under Wisconsin statutes 971.15, does require the defense to satisfy you jurors to a reasonable certainty by the greater weight of the credible evidence that at the time the crimes were committed, which was February 22nd of 2022, that Taylor Schabusiness had a mental disease or had a mental defect, and that as a result, she lacked the substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct or to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law.
Brown County Assistant District Attorney Caleb Saunders argued Schabusiness's disturbing choices did not equate to mental illness.
What Ms. Schabusiness did to Shad is disturbing. It's conduct we don't see often. It's conduct that you may hear about and think, my gosh, that person must not have been in their right mind when that happened. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you otherwise. But you've already carefully listened to the evidence and followed the law that the judge gave you. And you'll do so going forward as well. Because you will be told what a mental disease or defect is and what it is not. A mental disease is not antisocial conduct. It's not conduct brought about by use of a controlled substance, a temporary mental state caused by a controlled substance. A person is not mentally ill just because they commit something that's unnatural, that's so enormous, that just is beyond comprehension, right? You'll be instructed that those are not mental diseases or defects. So as disturbing as the conduct you already heard about is, and may be, that's not where the analysis ends.
For the defense's first witness, jurors heard from Schabusiness's father, Arturo Coronado, who described her troubling childhood, mental health issues, and drug use.
Something happened to Taylor's mother at some point?
She passed away.
Okay.
She passed away May 20th, 2009, in her sleep.
Okay. Did that take a toll on your daughter, Taylor?
Well, of course.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit,
sir?
sir?
On my son as well and me.
Okay. Right. It took a toll on everybody, correct?
But yeah.
And when her mother passed away in May of 2009, how old was Taylor?
probably 11 and a half.
Okay.
My son and daughter were, about 9 and a half, 11 and a half years old.
Okay. Was there a point where she got pregnant?
Well, about a year and a half ago, maybe.
Okay. And she had a baby, correct?
Yes, she did.
And the baby is currently living in Texas with the grandparents, correct?
Yeah, how is that relevant to anything here? Why do we need to talk about him?
Let me ask you this. So, before the baby was born, was she placed at Nicolay Psychiatric Center?
Before the baby was born?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Okay. Did you see her at the Nicolay Psychiatric Center?
Oh,
when she was there?
yeah. I'm sorry. It's just so much going on.
It's through Brown County.
Yeah, I went to take her there myself, actually.
Okay. Why did you take her there?
She just wasn't in the right state of mind.
Was she suicidal?
Probably.
What was the drug?
Meth, heroin, whatever else. I don't know.
Marijuana?
Yeah, I don't know. The kid was already doing that before, and just a fucking loser, and he got my daughter involved in that.
As Coronado was escorted from the courtroom, our cameras caught an interesting exchange between the pair.
Love you too. Go Paris.
Schabusiness's interactions and facial expressions were a point of discussion throughout the trial, as she smiled or laughed at seemingly inappropriate times, or even pointed finger guns at Judge Thomas Walsh. The defense's first witness, forensic psychologist Dr. Diane Litton, touched on this.
How about her facial expressions? Can you give some commentary on that from what you've seen?
Very unusual. She's been described as smirky. Smirky. She has inappropriate, grinning, weird grinning when she's talking about the crimes. People have interpreted it to be like laughing at what she did. At times, in the jail, with evaluators, with me, at times, briefly, it's very strange. Other times looking, I can mimic it, very scowly. A lot of people interpret it superficially to be grinning. Grinning it all, but getting a kick out of everything. Not me. Based on my experience and training, that's a psychotic person right there. That's what's causing this really weird, bizarre. And I'm telling you, to me, it's off the scale. 32 years, I've seen a lot of psychotic people, bipolar, psychotic, manic, and I just haven't seen very many like this. Very exceptional, very exceptional.
Ask you about what is your opinion as it relates to your evaluation and assessment of Taylor Schabusiness?
My opinion is that she qualifies for the not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect.
What followed was conflicting expert testimony from state's witnesses.
I found that there was not sufficient support for assigning a diagnosis such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia that could presumably underlie those symptoms.
Did you have any concerns about the validity of the claimed symptoms?
Yes, I did.
And what were those concerns?
And so my concerns were manifold. There has been a remarkable inconsistency in presentation over the pendency of this case in terms of the symptoms the defendant has claimed to forensic examiners versus to clinical providers within the jail, and even during very similar time frames, she's offered contradictory remarks. And apparently, only during the interview with Dr. Lighton has anyone observed her during the pendency of this case to seem to be preoccupied with internal stimuli. That's not something that I have observed. The validity skills for that instrument suggested she was grossly exaggerating psychiatric symptoms in a manner that would be extreme and inconsistent, even for a patient with legitimate schizophrenia.
Up next, a second round of closing arguments from both sides after Schabusiness again declined to testify.
That Ms. Schabusiness continues to have prominent psychotic symptoms and has not used substances for at least 1 year. There was some talk about the feigning, the faking, the malingering. Feigning means faking. About that topic. And Dr. Lighton indicated that it was her opinion that my client was psychotic at the time of the alleged offense, and it wasn't simply due to drug use. It's clear that Taylor Schabusiness had a problem with methamphetamine, with drugs, marijuana, other drugs maybe. Dr. Lighton says that Ms. Schabusiness had a very strange presentation, had facial expressions that can appear inconsistent with the context. If you're talking to her about something, she might smile or grin, and it may not be the appropriate time for that. But she opines that her assessment finds that Taylor Schabusiness has a genuine mental disorder of a psychotic nature, which is most likely bipolar 1 disorder.
So this idea that this manic episode arose and dissipated in a flash, just happening to be around the 5 minutes where she's actually strangling him and then the day that she dismembers Shad, it's utter farce. There's no basis for that. Instead, we're relying on a bipolar 1 diagnosis from April of 2021. It's a year before the offense. Mental disease or defect is not a mental state brought about by the ingestion of a controlled substance. So when we heard about meth-induced psychosis, right? Again, that's something that's being brought about by a controlled substance. Those aren't mental diseases or defects. You're responsible in this state for anything you do because you choose to ingest methamphetamine. That's the law. You heard nothing in this case about there being some permanent condition. None of the doctors diagnosed the defendant from suffering from any brain disease because of methamphetamine use or some other substance. Not even her doctors will say that. So when the defense argues that chronic use of drugs or alcohol may produce a condition that can constitute a mental disease or defect, if the condition has become permanent, nobody is testifying to that in this case. That's not any evidence that you heard.
Jurors then deliberated for only 55 minutes before returning a verdict.
Question 1. At the time the crimes were committed, did the defendant have a mental disease or mental defect? Answer, no. There's no answer then for question 2. It is dated this date, July 27, 2023, signed by the foreperson. There were no dissenting jurors.
Schabusiness is set to return to court on September 26th for sentencing. As Wisconsin does not have the death penalty, she now faces a sentence of life in prison without parole. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.